Welcome back to the Shepherd's Pie, a slice of hope to raise faithful kids. I'm Antony Kolenc, an attorney, homeschooling columnist, and author of the Harwood Mysteries Teen Medieval Adventure series. We're looking forward, by the way, to the release of book 4 in that series, which is now available for pre-order on Amazon. All right, on today's show, we're going to be discussing resources for homeschooling families with the world-famous homeschool reviewer, Cathy Duffy. Today, my guest is Cathy Duffy. Cathy has been reviewing resources for homeschoolers since 1982. She helps homeschoolers figure out what will work best for their family, and her website, CathyDuffyReviews.com, offers more than 1,000 reviews with comparison shopping links. She began educating her 3 sons at home in 1982, continued all the way through high school. She also taught numerous group classes for home-educated students and church groups. In fact, her extensive research and experience have made her a popular speaker at homeschooling conferences around the world. She lives in California with her family. Cathy, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
I'm so glad to be here.
How does one become a world-famous homeschool curriculum reviewer?
Well, I didn't set out to be. When we started homeschooling back in the early 80s, it was the dark ages of homeschooling. There was really no curriculum for homeschoolers to speak of. There just wasn't anything out there hardly. So we were scrambling. We were getting used school books from the dumpsters at the local public schools, or borrowing books from the library. And a lot of the early unit studies came out of homeschoolers trying to just put things together, create things themselves. So I was always interested in curriculum. I had set up a Sunday school program and, got into a serious interest in curriculum years before that. So when I moved into homeschooling, I just applied, my interest in curriculum to looking for resources. And then we were communicating, those of us, we found each other and we were communicating. This is, again, back in the snail mail, type it up, mail it out, information days. And so I just started sharing information. We had a little newsletter we put together, and it grew from that quickly into this comb-bound book, and then, eventually a typed up book, and finally something created on a computer, and then the website. So, it just kind of grew with the homeschooling market because I needed to know what resources were out there, and so did other people. So we were just sharing information.
So back in the old days, before the internet, you were essentially sending out your reviews by snail mail on newsletters. When did you start the website?
That's a good question. I'm thinking it was in the 90s, but I don't even remember exactly. The whole thing with moving into the computer age was a long, drawn-out process. It grew gradually, just like everything else. It's all been very organic. I never set out to do any of this.
In addition to the website, though, you've also had this whole series of very successful book, essentially the 100 top picks for homeschool curriculum, and then 101, 102, and now I see you're up to 103.
Yeah.
Were those essentially growing out of the website, or is that more reflection of before the website?
Yeah, the book started first. It was Christian Home Educators Curriculum Manual, each about a 300 plus page book. Then I shrank it back down when I started the Top Picks series because it was so ridiculous. And at that time, I think we must have been starting the website around then. It was in the mid 90s because then I had reviews on the website. So I didn't feel like I had to put everything in the books. That was what was driving me before that.
Is there anything that was in your background, education or otherwise, that you felt really kind of gave you a good platform to be doing these types of reviews?
That's an interesting question. No, I don't have a teaching background, but I was driven toward this for, teaching worldview really influenced me a lot. The idea that there are fundamental beliefs, fundamental assumptions that underlie everything we do. And homeschooling is a piece of that to me, that this is a way to raise our children so they will know God, know how to think, understand how what they believe applies in all areas of life. So that drove me to want to learn more about different topics. And I don't know, I guess energize me to pass that information on to others. So it's more about being able to equip our children with what they need.
So the other thing you mentioned was, just how much things have changed since the 80s and how little we had back then and how much we have now. Looking back over that period of time, I mean, can you maybe, how did the growth happen? How have curricula changed from the time when homeschooling started? Have you seen some of that?
Well, we started out with more traditional curricula, but it was interesting that in the homeschool world, we quickly started developing alternative type things like the unit studies, and then the resurgence of classical education happened late in the game, really. But homeschoolers were on the cutting edge with developing resources that would work for them from the beginning. But at the same time, the technology has been a huge influence. I think most people use at least some of their resources online or get them online. There's no getting around it anymore. So many of the resources are hybrid type things where you're getting your teacher manual online or PDFs that you're using as part of your resources or streamed videos, whatever. I'm not spending much time reviewing what would be called a traditional curriculum, with a textbook and a teacher's guide, and it's all done offline. I'm not hardly reviewing any of that anymore. I think it's important to comment. So many of the resources now, some excellent things are free. You can go online and get great stuff for free. With homeschoolers, you've got usually more than one child. And so they may need different curricula. Each child, like this one needs a manipulative-based math program, and that one just needs an independent study program. Go off and do it on their own. So you can do that.
So, all right. So as many homeschoolers as there are, though, they may have different preferences. They may like different things about different curricula. When you started looking at how to choose a curriculum, if you're a homeschooling parent, and what you look for when you're reviewing a curriculum, what are some of the factors that go into your reasoning?
Well, there are loads of factors, and again, depends on the age of the child and the subject area and whatnot. But stepping back from that, and I spend the first chapters in my book on how to choose curriculum, because I think it's really important to step back from the particular curricula to, the bigger thing. What are my goals? What do I want to accomplish this year? And it's not necessarily what the school down the street would be doing. What do we need to do with this child this year? Maybe they've been struggling with reading and you really want to work on some remediation, maybe, some therapy or whatever, and you want to back off on some of the other areas to concentrate on that for just this year. So anyways, goal setting, I always thought, again, worldview was a major part of our education. So I designed, especially when we got into the junior high school years, I designed my curriculum around worldview education. It may be something as simple as, just we want to get through Algebra 1 this year, whatever. But you know what it is for your children, what they need to learn. Maybe it's learning study skills. Who knows, whatever it is. Setting those goals, it's important. So you know where you're aiming, and then you're choosing resources to meet your goals rather than, well, what is everybody else doing? And then you also need to think about what approach to education is going to work best. And it may be something different with each of your children or some kind of compromise that suits the family. So you need to sort that out in terms of, do you like unit studies? Do you want to do a Charlotte Mason method or classical education or an eclectic mix of things, unschooling, whatever. So that's another area to address. And then the learning styles of your children and your teaching style. So often as parents, we teach our children the way we like to learn. It's kind of a default for most of us. And to step back from that and observe your children and figure out what's going to work best with each one of them, and then choosing the resources that best suit their learning styles can give you a much more efficient schooling process than if you're trying to just shove them into whatever you think you want to use. So those are all things that, I want people to stop and think about those before they choose curricula.
So parents, if they're doing it probably in their best interest, they're going to look at all those different factors you just talked about. But it occurs to me then your job as a reviewer of curricula becomes that much more difficult because now you have to take into account that, well, this, is this going to be good for a family doing unit studies, or is this good for a family doing this, that, or the other thing? How do you tackle that as a reviewer?
Well, I do. I look at it with those, what is this good for? Who would use this? I just finished reviewing Campfire Curriculums. This is a really unusual one. The father in the family, the husband and wife apparently did most of the writing. Well, he is in special forces, military background, and he created, it's an adventuresome curriculum. It's a unit study approach. They wrote it so that dads could do this in the evening. If you want to do it, just 30 minutes in the evening going through, and they've got all kinds of topics. They've got one on the military, they've got one on volcanoes, they've got ones on gardening, natural medicine, interesting selection of topics. Very unusual. Great for the family that wants to have dad involved, that likes unit studies, that wants a Christian base to their program. So I point out, here's who it's for. Here's what it's doing. Here's who it's for.
If a family is doing kind of that individual selection, as you described earlier, what would be your advice for them in using both your website and your book materials on being able to find the best options for their family?
Well, in the book, I have pages of charts where the top picks that are in my book, I break them down by a number of those factors so they can go across the charts, assuming they've read the first chapters and they know what they're looking for. Then they can go down the charts and, really hone down to what's likely to work for them. On the website, we have an advanced search tool where they can go in and identify probably even more. And again, it's going to search through everything on the website, but they can put in, the grade level, the subject area, sometimes, like in history, which area, world history, US history, core curriculum, supplementary curriculum. And then they can narrow that down by, again, learning styles, by all different factors. They can choose factors within learning styles on the website, or they can just choose, Wiggly Willy, Perfect Paula, my titles for the 4 primary learning styles. They can do that religious perspective. They can choose, so all of that sorting they can do on the website.
How do you keep yourself on top of that? I mean, it seems like, how do you even know what's coming out that wasn't out before and it's online or it's a new publication? How do you personally kind of get a hold of that?
Well, the major publishers often will let me know, or they're sending out announcements. I'm on their mailing list and I see something. I am overwhelmed with review requests from smaller publishers. So those come in just on a constant basis. And I try to just look at the website quickly. Does this even fit what I do? Is it something that looks interesting? And I have probably a 6-inch pile of printouts of pages from things that I'd like to get to. And I've got an ebook to review file on my computer that's quite large. So, I've got a huge backlog all the time. There's piles of boxes waiting to get open. They don't get open right away. So I have plenty of things to review. It's more a matter of sorting through and trying not to waste too much time on things that aren't ready for prime time, because I can spend a couple of days reviewing a big program and then come to the end of it and go, this just isn't worthy of a review.
You mentioned that you do find some top picks in these different areas. So I'm curious, what goes into your reasoning when you decide something should be, given a top pick category?
With the top picks, I'm trying to choose things for people from different perspectives, from religious perspectives, secular, Christian, Catholic, also things that will fit different situations, different learning styles. So things that are for independent study, things that will work better, taught one-on-one or in a group class. So I'm trying to make sure I'm presenting an assortment of choices that will fit, those different situations within each of the subject areas. And to do that now, I've had to drop out the fine arts and handwriting and, a lot of this, the smaller areas, and just concentrate more on the core areas. A lot of it has to do with, I really think this is good, and it's kind of a gut feeling at this point because I've looked at so many things. Some things just are right there at the top of my list for, whatever reason.
So let's talk maybe some different categories. I noticed that on your website, you have a section just for Catholic curricula, which is interesting. A lot of my listeners, maybe Catholic homeschoolers. Is there something that you're finding that's different or specific for Catholics?
There's one that I particularly like that works for all ages, Connecting with History from Roman Catholic History, because they've taken a combination, unit study, classical approach, and they're using an assortment of top quality real books, literature. They're providing a solid Catholic curriculum along, with this broad education that's just a quality education, and putting it together in a way so you can teach your children together to a large extent. And I think they've done a really nice job. And I wish more people would use that rather than, just traditional looking curricula, because again, I had mentioned before how important I think worldview education, understanding why you believe what you believe, and helping your children to understand that is so important. And I think Connecting with History does a great job on that end.
That is really interesting because, you focused on worldview. Obviously, there could be a distinction in, let's say, a Catholic worldview. I mean, what do you do with that? Because we obviously have, a lot of differences on doctrinal issues. I'm assuming that you just don't get into the weeds on any of that when you're reviewing.
Oh, I do. I do sometimes. Depends on what the program is. But if the worldview is noticeable in a resource, I will mention it. And maybe it's important to kind of step back here. I was raised Catholic, left for a long time, was in the Protestant world for more than 20 years. And that's where I really got seriously into studying about worldviews. And then I came back to the Catholic Church for theological reasons in 1998. So, I've got kind of the perspective on both ends. I know what they're looking for from the Protestant worldview and from the Catholic worldview. And there's a distinct difference at the bottom line there on, where's our source of authority? That's really where it's at. So much in common in other ways, but anyway, some distinct differences. But it really matters when you're looking at a curriculum if it's some that are Reformed Protestant are teaching, eternal security and predestination, and it comes across sometimes if you're doing a full-on history curriculum or something that's more comprehensive, it'll come through. David Quine with his Cornerstone curriculum comes from a Reformed Protestant perspective, and he does a really nice job if you want a Reformed Protestant worldview. But if you want a Catholic worldview, it's probably not going to work.
What about the online curricula? I know, that's been, I'm sure, a huge source of creativity once people have been able to do so much with online resources. You've reviewed some of those. Anything interesting on that front?
Yes. My mind is jumping back to that last question because, if you don't mind, I want to scoot back to this last one. I'm thinking of the Story of the World books. In my review of Story of the World, Susan Weisbauer's, they're so popular with families across the board. Yet I think it's the third one, don't quote me on this one, but I think it's the third one where it gets in the Middle Ages, where it takes a definitely Protestant turn. And I mentioned that in my reviews. That's the kind of thing I will point out, because I know lots of Catholic families use that series, but you need to know that if you hit that third book, you're going to get a slant there that may not be what you want. Okay, so back to the online question. Yes, I love the fact that we have so much available to us online. It's cut the cost of things down a lot because they can provide a lot of that ancillary material or cut the teachers' manuals down and put a lot of things online that used to be in these big, bulky, expensive teacher manuals. That's helped a lot. And then we can add videos and whatever else. So many of the most interesting resources are doing this combination thing where they give you like a guide and then they tie to the internet for go watch this video, go to this website and learn about this, and then go read this book. And they're walking you through. They've combined all of these different resources and put them together into a curriculum for you. And then it's multimedia and it's so much more interesting than reading a textbook. So I love what people are doing with the online resources. Some people are using it just to provide a traditional curriculum in an online class format, which is, if it works, great. If not, don't do it. But there's so many interesting things happening online. And I think I like best these ones that combine a variety of resources.
Now that you're seeing how the online curriculum are being developed, do you think there's actually a benefit over a more traditional or a pure paper curriculum to do one of these newer ones?
Yeah, because you can pull in resources beyond just one book easily, usually at no extra cost. In terms of learning styles, if you throw a video in here and there, usually students are much more interested in that. There's an interesting history program, the Nomad Professor. This is new. They've only got, I think, 2 courses done so far, American history. But you've got a university professor and a high school teacher working together to put it together. And it's so different. And they've done what really needs to happen with history curriculum. They're presenting topics and then getting students to think about it from different perspectives instead of trying to take one viewpoint and say this is the only way to think about it. They're trying to teach students how to think and evaluate historical information for themselves. With all the controversy going on, I think this is the way to teach history going forward. But they do it with video lectures, video streamed on site. They use all of these different components, PDFs, downloaded. You're watching document lessons on how to work with the source documents, and then students how to write papers. So they're putting all of these resources together with really top-notch courses that teach students to think, how to really understand history. I love that sort of thing.
You mentioned something really critical too when you mentioned the controversy, and especially when it comes to history and things like that. Are you seeing this in your reviews? For instance, I know there's a push for like critical race theory to be taught, and even LGBT type issues. Are you seeing that in the homeschooling realm? And how do you handle that when it comes to your reviews?
Yeah, it's coming into the homeschool world too. There are secular suppliers to the homeschool world, and a lot of them are going woke just like the rest of the world. And I try to keep an open mind because there's value in broadening our resources, like for history, to include more stories, more information about marginalized people. That's worth doing, broaden your history perspective, but not to the point where I've seen there was one I was given to review, and it presented nothing but a progressive viewpoint. It linked to websites that were very, extremely progressive, referred to Howard Zinn's history as the source. And Howard Zinn is well known as, I guess, most misleading resources for history, in terms of, going the progressive direction. Everything America did is bad, and, everybody else is okay. It's just really, I could go down that road, but I won't. Still, some of the resources go too far, and I won't review them if it's just so far off. But if it's progressive in a way that, yes, you're welcome as parents to teach your children whatever you want. Is it truthful, I guess, is what I'm looking for. And you can weight it in different ways. If you can weight it in such a way that you're teaching them and it's still truthful, it's not misrepresenting all of history, then okay. So there are a few things I've reviewed a little begrudgingly, but yes, here, if you're looking for progressive resources, here they are.
Okay, so at least the family would know, because maybe that's what they're looking for. They would see it identified as such. All right, so as we wrap up, then I guess my final question would be: you're talking to a brand new homeschooler. They're over their head. They don't know what to give their kids when it comes time to picking a curriculum. What would be your best nugget of advice to them?
Depends how confident they are. I'd say, first of all, stick to your own goals. Figure out what's important to you. Look at your children, look at your family, stick to your own goals. And that's so important in terms of your focus, because you can feel so discouraged because you can't do everything. And it's overwhelming, the amount of things coming at you, and if you're trying to do it all, you're going to fail miserably. So know what's important to you, what's important for your kids, and aim for that, and everything else is secondary. If you get to it, great. If not, just let it go, because you've got to accomplish what's most important. I think for new homeschoolers, sometimes it's even hard to figure out what's most important to them. So taking the time to step back from it, don't just rush into things, but take the time to step back and think about that and try to come up with what's most important to you. And then again, step back from your first year and consider it a learning experience. You're not going to do everything well the first year, maybe you will, but more likely you're going to stumble, and think about it as a learning experience. Don't hold yourself to this really high standard the first year, because you're going to be learning about your children, about yourself, about what works for your family. There's so many pieces you're putting together here. And maybe if it gives parents any comfort, it's, look how badly the schools did through the COVID experience. You can't do worse than that, hardly. So just keep on,
right.
keeping on.
You're right about that. They just released some test scores that showed that there was some miserable decline in public school students testing during that time.
Yeah.
But wow. Well, thank you so much, Cathy, for being on the show today. This has been very informative. If people want to know how to get a hold of your materials, where do you have them going?
Yeah, just go to the website. The book, 103 Topics, is only available as a PDF through my website. It's full of links, so it doesn't really make sense as a print book now. My website, CathyDuffyReviews.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
So that is all the time we have for the show today. We've been speaking with Cathy Duffy about the best way to choose curricula for homeschoolers. Again, this is Antony Barone Kolenc. If you have a question for me or a topic that you want me to cover, please go on my website, drop me a line at antonykolenc.com. You can also learn more about the Harwood Mysteries on there. Until next time, may God bless you and your families as we work together to raise faithful kids.